Okay, let's get started right into the video today. Because an egg shape is a more challenging shape to do, I like to get a picture of it in my mind first. So I'll draw a circle and a smaller circle, and then I'll kind of connect them here with a bulgy line that makes the shapes flow together. And I have that in my mind. I can put that away, and that's really just for reference. No two eggs are the same shape or even the same size, so we have a lot of leeway here. And so if your egg isn't perfect, then that's okay. It's just something that's a really good shape to practice on because it's not common and it's not easy to do. To start out shaping our egg, it doesn't really matter which end of the egg is the big end and which end is the little end. I like to do the big end on the right, but you can always switch it up. It depends on what you're more comfortable with. The reason I like to do it on the right is because of my shape that I showed you earlier. I'm just trying to make a half of a sphere here. So I'll take my 3/8 spindle gouge and I'll start it up high. Then I roll it over a little bit and get on that edge of the wing just a little bit and follow that curve all the way down. Today we're working on a piece of figured poplar. It's about 2 1/4 inches around and about 5 or 6 inches long. And I like to work with poplar because it's a really forgiving wood. The figure in this makes it a little bit more challenging though. Whenever you get that curl in the wood, it can make it so that it doesn't cut as easily. You have grain directions running different ways. I'm hoping that will be really pretty at the end, but just to make sure whenever you're cutting figured woods, keep your tools really sharp so that it cuts a little bit better and you have less problems with the wood tearing out. So I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video here so you can watch how I shape the other end and how that comes together a little bit better. And I'll start out by just kind of guessing where I think the end of the egg will be. And I'll take my narrow parting tool and part in and remove some waste material. And then I'll just kind of round that down. And you can see that it's a little bit bulky here on that side. So we'll take some of that down. And it's still not narrow enough on this end. So I'll just kind of focus on removing some of that material. And then I'll start working on this second circle down here at the end. I'll bring it down and then I'll start to curve that second circle down. I'm leaving about a 1/2 inch or so on the end to support the egg while I'm sanding it and dyeing it. We can take that off later. Now I'm going to sand it here with a 120 grit. And then I'll sand it with a 180 grit. And you don't want to do too much sanding on this. You don't want a highly polished finish that the dye won't soak into. All right, to get started on the dyeing process, I usually like to protect my lathe and myself. So I'll put down a towel on the bed of the lathe, and then I'll put on some gloves because this dye likes to get everywhere. So if you don't want dyed fingers as well, then do this. I like to use alcohol-based wood dyes for dyeing my projects. These are the artisan wood dyes that come from Craft Supplies USA. And they're really good because they're a pre-mixed dye, so the color remains consistent. And they're fairly light stable, which means the color lasts a long time. I also like TransTint dyes, and you can buy those on Amazon, and I'll put a link in the description for those. But those are even more light stable, so the color lasts longer. But the problem is you have to mix them yourself. And so your colors might not be the same from project to project. Now on this egg, I'm going to use some black TransTint dye to put down in all this figure that's on the side here. And I'm only going to do it on one side so we can see the difference in what this will do. And this is a black, it's really dark. You can use brown or something like this. Sometimes the brown will run and just become orange if you put alcohol on it. So be careful of that. That's why I like to use black for this. And we'll just put that on there to kind of show off this curl or figure. And you can see that just a little bit right here. I don't want to leave it this dark though. It's covering up the wood grain and I don't like to do that. So one of the things I keep around the shop is I have some denatured alcohol all the time. So I'm going to try and wipe off as much as I can of this dye with the alcohol. And the good thing is it's an alcohol-based dye, so some of it will come off. But I still don't like how dark it is. It's not showing off the wood grain how I would like it to. And alcohol dries really quickly. So we can just kind of let this sit for about a minute and it'll be dry. And then I can take some sandpaper and sand the rest of this off. Now, it's going to take a little bit more sanding than what you would think. There's still a lot of black on here, and I don't want that to show up as much because this is just a base coat for that black to soak in to that softer area of grain and then show off the dye that's on top. It's even good to sand along the grain and try and remove some of those sanding scratches, and I didn't do the best job of it here, but you can see that the black is about where I want it to be. It's just kind of a highlight color in the background. Now we get to put some real color on. Now, this is our orange artisan dye. We'll just put a good amount on a paper towel here. And then I'm just going to rub this all over the bottom. And you can do it all one color if you like, but I'm going to do two colors here and try and blend them together. So we'll just kind of rub that in and let it soak as much as we can. And you can see that there's kind of a hard line there in the middle that I'm going to try and blend together with a yellow color on top. So I'll put a little bit more denatured alcohol on the towel on the other end, and we'll just try and blend this together. And it's not blending too well, you can still see a pretty hard line there. One of the things I can do to try and blend out that line is to just put the other color on. It's got alcohol in it as well, and so it may blend those colors a little bit together there in the center. But we'll go ahead and just put that on and see how it looks. It's looking pretty good, but yellow is a pretty light color, so I still have a hard line between them, and I want to blend those so that they're not quite so hard. It just needs to be a softer blend in the middle, so I'll try turning the lathe on and just blending that together, and it's still there. So another thing I can do is use a little bit more orange and just kind of dab this in an uneven pattern across the egg now. Yeah, I like that a lot better. So now as I come back in with some denatured alcohol, I should be able to blend that away. That is looking a whole lot better. Now you can leave it with the dye this bright. I like to really show off the wood grain when I do a piece like this. And so I'll try and remove a little bit more of this dye so that that wood pops out. And so I'll hit it again with denatured alcohol. And then I'll go ahead and sand a little bit more of it off again. That's about the way I like it to look right there. Now we just need to cut it off there and get it off the lathe. So I'll just bring back the spindle gouge and we'll go ahead and remove some of this waste material here. Just work your way down a little at a time until this is ready to part off of here. When I get down really close, I'm going to bring my hand over to support the egg. We'll just carefully nibble away some material. And it did what I didn't want it to do. And you can see that it broke off kind of inside a little bit. Hopefully there's enough there that I can take away some of it and still be able to not have a hole in the end of my egg. I'm just going to bring out one of my carving knives and just kind of nibble away at this material to see if I can salvage this and be able to just sand it without losing too much of my shape here. And then we'll just do a little bit of sanding with the sanding pad on a mandrel. And I start out with a 120 grit. And I just keep it moving, just try and shape and refine that end and get rid of that little hole that we'd left in there. Then I'll go ahead and sand through the grits. And when I get to the finer grits, I'll start to hand sand. And it's okay at this point to go ahead and hand sand over the dye that you've put on because we're just going to put another layer on. And so try and feather that out so that it looks good. So we'll go ahead and put on some yellow dye on the end. And it's going to be a little bit brighter than the dye that is on there now, because we sanded that off a little bit. So we'll go ahead and take that back off with some more denatured alcohol. Blend it all together as much as you can. And I quite like the look of this. I think we're ready for a finish. Whenever I'm putting lacquer onto a dyed piece of wood, I try and keep the first coat as light as possible. This is alcohol-based dye that we've used, and in the lacquer, there is some solvents, and I don't want the solvents to spread that dye around any more than I've already done to get the look that I like. So I'll do a really light coat and let it dry. It should dry really quickly, and then you can put on subsequent coats. I do about 3 coats, and then I flip it over and do the other side. That's about it. I want to wish you all a happy Easter. Like and subscribe if you would. This is Jason Geiser with Geiser Woodturner. We'll see you soon.